say firstly thank you very much to UrbanGrowth New South Wales for inviting me to come and join in this really important conversation that you are having. And maybe I'll just emphasize one thing right at the beginning. It's really what David Pitchford said this morning, is we're in this sort of thinking stage. And I think this is a really good way of going about it. We're not trying to plan or decide anything just now. It's about thinking new ideas. So my background is local government in England. I enjoyed working in different cities. And then I worked in central government in Whitehall for a bit. And then I escaped and became an academic. But I've always been very passionate about working with cities, and with activists and with people in practice. I'm going to now do a tiny bit of audience research. This might be helpful for you as well, so you could look round, because I'm not clear who's joined this particular meeting. If you are a politician, in other words, elected, would you mind raising your hand? And I get a sense if we've got one or two politicians here. Thank you very much. Thank you. If you are a public servant, by that I mean a paid professional who works for a local authority or for UrbanGrowth New South Wales or the state, if you're a paid official, if we get a sense of how, okay, we've got quite a few of those folks. Okay, thank you. Some of you might have more than one hat, but we can live with that. Okay, I guess we probably have some people here from the communities around Base Precinct. Can I see? Excellent, thank you. Have we got any business people in the audience? One or two, yes, excellent. Any academics? Excellent. Anyone who's just realized that this is not the funding session and they should be in the other room? No, okay, perfect. Well, in this presentation, I'm going to talk about global urban trends and really a little bit about governing urban transformation. I'm going to divide it into three parts, and I'm going to step away from Sydney quite a lot at the beginning to look at urban trends across the world, then come back to talk about the power of place-based leadership. This is what I'm really trying to get across today. And then a little bit about leading innovation. And then hopefully that'll open the way for some questions after tea. I have got a new book out, and I'm quite excited. When you write a book, it's nice when it comes out. It comes out next week. It's called Leading the Inclusive City. So it looks like that. And the organisers have got one or two copies in the book reading room area, so you could have a look. And if you wanted to follow up on some of these ideas, there's a lot more detail. But I'm going to try and give you some key points. You don't need to read the book. Okay. This urbanizing, all the photos, by the way, are of cities that are included in my book. There are 21 inspiring examples of civic leadership in the book. And today I'm not going to talk about all of them, just a few to illustrate the argument about leadership. This is Portland, Oregon, which is probably the greenest city in the US, but you could have a debate, but it's a very successful, well-run city. I'm not going to talk about it today, but I wanted, in this opening slide, to just give us a lift. We are very fortunate living now in a world with so many spectacularly good cities, and there's just 8: Chicago, Copenhagen, Freiburg, Malmo, Ahmedabad, Hamamatsu, Auckland, Guangzhou. That's just 8 cities. Those are 8 of the 17 rather in the book. I'm not going to go through them all, but I just wanted to remind us that the cities are fantastic places, and we're in one now. And we must focus on challenges and deal with problems, but let's not forget how wonderful cities are. Let's just look at these global urban trends. This is the percentage of the world population living in cities. So back in 1900, only 13% lived in cities. Now it's 54%. So demographers argue about the date, but around about 2008, the world went urban for the first time in human history. Before that date, most people did not live in cities. Then it became 50%, and it's going up further. So we're living in an urbanizing world, so that makes cities even more important than perhaps they were. I've just looked a bit more, one more set of graphs to bring out a bit more detail. Again, we're just coming from 1900. This is the world urban population growth in billions. 220 million, 732 million in 1950, 3.6 billion, 5 billion, and then if we go to 2050, 6.3 billion. So we've got a steep rise in the size of the urban population. I want to focus attention on this 1.4 billion jump. So from more or less recently to 2030. This is not far away. That's a 38% increase in the urban population. 1.4 billion is like having 175 cities the size of London are going to get built in this period. So if you're interested in city planning and urban management, if you've chosen that as a career, you made a good choice because there's an enormous amount of work to do. I was looking at the sessional papers for the conference here. The Sydney population is also going to go up 37% by 2031. And as we've heard in earlier presentations, but you're in a city that's expanding really quite rapidly. And that's really quite exciting. And I think it suggests to me that we should see the Based Precinct as part of a transformation of the whole city. It's not just an isolated part. Okay, where are these big cities? I've just got two maps. These are where the biggest cities in the world were in 2050. The blue histogram is on a scale, so the taller the column, the bigger the city. New York City was then the biggest city in the world. I think it was about 12.3 million. Tokyo not far behind. I'm going to show you the map in 2025, but just try and visualize where these cities are. See the Europe, Russia, North America. Just jump forward. And what we have here is where the 20 largest cities in the world will be in 2025. The blue histograms are to the same scale in the two maps. So you can see we're going to have some much bigger cities than we've ever had before. These are the mega cities. Tokyo actually is projected to be the biggest city. I think it's about 36, 37 million there. These are very big places. The top 7 of those cities will have a population that is bigger than Australia. In other words, the current population is about 23 million of Australia. 7 of those individual cities will have a population above 23 million. So there's, again, I'm just trying to get across the drama here and the scale and pace of change, unprecedented in human history. More interesting than these maps, actually, of the megacities, is that most of the expansion will be in cities less than 5 million. If you look at where is the growth, and it's across the world, but particularly in developing countries. Okay, what we now have, that's a little bit of context. We're in this urbanizing world. Some people are in despair about these changes. It's very threatening and disturbing. And there are powerful forces in modern society that impact cities adversely. In the book, I talk about placeless power. Decision makers who do not care about a place when they make decisions. And I do name and identify some multinational companies that have destroyed communities. And it's not that they're bad people, it's that they're driven by profit. So they're not thinking about the impact of their decisions on places. And the consequences for particular places can be quite bad. So in the book, I suggest place-based power is very important in navigating the problems with placeless power, but negotiating good outcomes. So I'm not trying to argue against multinational companies here. I'm just suggesting that their power and influence has grown too far, and they need to be held to account by place-based leadership, place-based power. Okay, I must just go back a step, otherwise I'll be in trouble. This is a photograph of, is it? Yes, it is. This is Bristol. This is where I'm from. We have a directly elected mayor who's very passionate and enthusiastic. If I came to an international conference and did not show a nice picture of Bristol, I'd be in deep trouble when I get back. just because some of you are involved in government, this is our city hall, this is College Green. It's a nice historic city. Up here is the Clifton Suspension Bridge, which we're very proud of. When it was built in the 1860s, it was the biggest suspension bridge in the world. It is quite a lot smaller than the Sydney Harbour Bridge, I have to tell you, but it's still a very nice bridge. Okay, Bristol is one of my case studies, but I'm going to talk about two examples now. Now, is there anybody here from Melbourne? Okay, I'm on thin ice now. I thought it would be nice to talk about a real success story from Australia in this presentation, because we're in Australia. And I know there's a friendly rivalry between Sydney and Melbourne, but I do think the story of Melbourne is quite impressive. This is, you know, the local paper in Melbourne is called The Age. 1978, this journalist, Norman Day, wrote an article about Melbourne, an empty, useless city centre. And some of you who know Melbourne would know he was right. It was a dump, absolutely dead at night, totally, but also dead pretty much in the day. If you fast forward, you can see that Melbourne has had a fantastic makeover. And I'm not going to try and give you all the detail, you know it, but they've transformed the public realm out of all recognition. I think they've moved from 650 dwellings in the central area to about 28,000 in this period. So a lot of student housing, a lot of accommodation, redesign of the public realm, excellent public transport, and really get the cars out, get the people in, and what a wonderful creative place. Now, the reason I'm giving you that example, all of them would work on this, every place in the book that's really outstanding now was once really bad. So if you're in a bad place, don't despair. It's possible to make a big difference and move to another level. And Melbourne, the Economist Intelligence Unit, I'm not sure the figures shown earlier were right. I'd read the return saying Melbourne is the most livable city in the world, but who knows? On these indicators, Sydney and Melbourne are both very high. Why has that happened? Place-based leadership in Melbourne. Successful leadership by the politicians, but also the public servants and the business interests and communities. Those, when I was asking those questions, they were brought together in a very effective way forward. That example is really about a lot of government leadership. I want to give you only one more. I'm not going to do too many today. How many of you have been to New York City and seen the High Line? I wonder, oh, good, excellent, oh, great, okay. This is a disused railway down the west side of Manhattan. This is taken some while ago. It's been disused since 1980. In 2001, the mayor of New York City, Rudy Giuliani, signed the demolition order. Property developers were after this. This is Manhattan. Talk about property prices and values. And he signed the demolition order, and there was resistance from the local community. The local community had other ideas, and they have a really successful track record. Here, one or two pictures of the High Line Park in the sky. I've got a little aerial shot of it here. This is an elevated space. You can see the rails, by the way, that they've kept in to show the history a little bit. The urban design is superb. It's probably the most successful public space in any city in the world now, in terms of coming from a disused dump to fabulous. The thing I really like about it is, you know, New Yorkers, they're always whizzing around a very intense kind of lifestyle. On that High Line, you'll see New Yorkers, large numbers, holding hands. I want to suggest this as a possible indicator for quality of life. You were talking earlier about feelings we have for place. It's just that little bit quieter. It's off the street level. And why has it happened? Two gay guys who are not urban designers or architects or property people just thought this looked like a nice place to be. They went up, you weren't supposed to go up, but they used to go up, yeah? A bit of a fun place. So they started a campaign. It's called Friends of the High Line that were behind it. And the good news is that City Hall listened to the community. So they've already signed the demolition order. Mayor Bloomberg reversed it. He said, well, we're not going to demolish it. These people have got some great ideas. We're going to do something different. So I'm just giving you those as a couple of examples. The Melbourne one, which is more government-led, and the local community activist one. I've got two more ideas, really, just to throw in the mix before I want to give you some concepts that might help thinking about governance in Sydney. Two ideas. One, and we've heard quite a bit already on this, but I just want to give another example. It's quite helpful to engage in city-to-city learning, particularly internationally, because inventive practice is taking place elsewhere, and it's not like you want to copy anywhere. I would rule that out. But you might get some inspiring ideas. This is Guangzhou. You remember the world maps I showed you, the mega cities? Guangzhou is one of those top 20 mega cities. It's got horrendous traffic congestion problems. They're trying to think, how can we deal with this? And they heard about bus rapid transit. Now, I'm not sure if everyone would know what that means. Do people know what bus rapid transit is, or should I just... A few nods, I'll be very quick then. Basically, you take road space away from the cars. You say, we're not, you in the vehicles, it's not a good use of the space. We're going to have that as dedicated busways. And then passengers get on and off the buses rather like you would on a metro. So it's a very fast on and off process in the stations. This is the largest bus rapid transit system in Asia, and it can take 25,000 people per hour in one direction, which compares with a metro. Yeah, just take that in. That's a hell of a lot. 1/10 of the cost of a metro. 10%. How did they come up with this idea? They went to Bogota, and they looked at Curitiba, and they learned from Latin American cities where this model is well established. Curitiba is in the book. That's a sensational story where the mayor transformed the city by putting in a whole bus rapid transit network. Very unpopular, motorists hated him, but he put it through, and it's been a real success. And actually he gained the benefit. He became a 3-time mayor, Jamie Lerner, of Curitiba. The point I wanted to highlight, though, it's quite useful to just raise your head and look around, because there might be some interesting practice that could inspire your own thinking here in Sydney. I've got one more idea to throw in. This is probably one of the greenest cities in Europe. This is Freiburg in the south part of Germany, where these are new neighborhoods. This could be useful for, if you were thinking of development prospects. Very, very advanced eco-friendly design. The cars don't get into these neighborhoods unless it's essential, like to take an infirm person in or something like that. But they're very safe for kids. The communities help design all the housing. The housing is so well designed that quite a lot of the residents get an income from their electricity. In other words, they're not paying electricity bills because they've got really well-designed houses with solar power. So they get an income. It's really outstanding public transport, the trams. And earlier this morning we were talking about what do you do about public transport. Do you put it in first or later? They put the public transport in first. So there's a superb tram line into Vauban, and there's only a few people living there. And you could say, well, that's crazy because it's not very cost effective. At the beginning, it's not. But over time, as it fills up, you've altered travel behavior and movement patterns. So in Freiburg, car ownership is going down, and they're happy about it. And the economy is going up. Several hundred jobs created, particularly in energy industries. So I'm conscious I'm using the time up here, but I want to go into some concepts in the last part. Yeah, perfect. That's Guangzhou, which I mentioned earlier. I'm now not going to show you more and more stories. I think in the end that can become disabling. I think storytelling, I think, Charles, you mentioned it, storytelling is a really good idea. You can discover new insights. But if you maybe get too many stories, it gets a bit complex. I'm now going to step away and just suggest some ideas or concepts that might help us understand successful place-based leadership. Maybe I'll just do this slowly. My suggestion to you is that any place, there will be a system of place-based governance, and there are 4 forces framing your possibilities in any place. At the bottom, in solid, are environmental limits. The subtitle of my book is Place-Based Innovation for a Bounded Planet. If we keep exploiting resources the way we are, we haven't got a future for our kids and their kids. So that one is non-negotiable. We've got to get way more eco-friendly in how we build our cities. This, of course, is what President Obama was saying at the G20, and I think we've seen some nice steps forward this last week. And there's the big climate change summit in Paris in December next year, when we're hoping, those of us who care about the environment, for a massive shift forward in commitment. Even allowing for that, cities are driving a lot of the change on environmental awareness. And I don't want to bang on about it, because in Australia, you've got very high level of awareness of these issues. But it's not the case everywhere. Okay, what about these other three sides? Over here, I've got what I call the socio-cultural framing. That sounds, maybe that's a bit of jargon. I'm trying to describe the feelings and passions we have for a place. So if you live somewhere, you care about it. My definition of place is somewhere you care about. There's something emotional going on here. It matters to you. So you want to try and shape what happens. So you may serve in politics and become an elected politician pushing for change, or a community activist, or other ways you might try and get your city to be like you want to be to live in it. You are, unfortunately, ranged against economic forces, that placeless power that I mentioned earlier, which doesn't actually care about your place. To be blunt, they don't. So there's a bit of a battle here between economic interests, global capitalism, wanting to make development profits from land, and communities wanting a more socially aware kind of development. I don't want to polarize this too much, because the best cities get into a conversation. I think this is what UrbanGrowth New South Wales is trying to do, saying, well, actually, this is the world. These are forces are there. Let's not get down in a cave and fight the opposition. Let's try and work out some new ways of solving problems together. At the top is what I call governmental framing, which is in any city or place, there is another level of government above. Obviously, for you here, it's the Victoria State, but then you've also got a federal. Where I live in Bristol, it's the central government is very influential. So you do need to understand that and know what powers are placed where to be able to understand your space for local leadership. Okay, that's the framing. If I just go on to the actual idea about leadership and innovation, one more diagram, and I pretty well got my whole argument presented. In any place, I suggest there are 5 realms of leadership, and they overlap. And I'll just quickly outline them. Firstly, chances are you've got some elected politicians, and actually maybe more than one set, which is the case here with the city and the state, and maybe the federal interest. Often, I do a lot of work with cities and local governments, and often I find people say, well, that is the leadership of the place. What are all these other realms? We've elected these people to be the leaders. They are the most important leaders, in my view, because they've been elected. And if you believe in democracy, you probably have to accept that is quite a good argument. You may have criticisms of the election process. Enormously important. Over here, I've put the public managerial professions. Quite a few of your public servants put your hands up. Often, public servants don't see themselves as leaders. I do workshops with them, and they often say, well, actually, we're not the leaders. The politicians are the leaders, and we work with the politicians, and we contribute. We're managers, we're scientists, or professional technical skills. I think that's to undervalue the leadership ability of these people. I think they are leaders, and I think in this zone, I call them innovation zones, you can do really quite exciting things that cross the political and the managerial. So these 2 realms are the state. There's still 3 more. Just quickly, and we've got quite a few in the room, we've got community voices, people who care about a place, or they might be in the voluntary sector, they might be activists, they might be bikers, they might have an enthusiasm, you know, I mean, all that lovely mix in civil society that has a care for a place. They are important leaders as well. Actually, I put universities in here. I'm an academic, and in some cities, Portland, Oregon is a great example. The university sees itself as a place-based leader. And in Portland, they require sustainable development and place-based work from all their students. All of them. You don't get a degree there unless you engage with the place. So it's quite inspiring. So I think universities have a role here. Of course, we have the business interests, enormously powerful. And as I say, there are different kinds of business interests, and they are either placeless or place-based. And it's not like one's good and one's bad, but they've got different interests, and any place-based leader needs to understand that and negotiate with an awareness of that. Down here, there is a trade union. That varies in different countries and contexts, but trade unions can be quite influential and in some cases can be quite forward-looking, often more on the defensive. My experience with trade unions on the whole is they're strong at defending interests and perhaps find it difficult to be more forward-looking. I'm being a bit unkind on some of my trade union friends, I think. Okay, this next diagram is not a new one. All I've done is put the 5 realms in the frame. So that's the model of place-based governance that I use in the book. And I really skipped over it, but I showed the areas of overlap between the realms. Maybe I should just go back to that just for a second. I call these innovation zones. And sometimes people say, Robin, we understand this model, we can see it, but in our city, these are conflict zones. They do overlap, but there's a lot of contestation and misunderstanding and maybe disagreement. Yes, there is in every city. Show me a city that's not got conflicts, and I will show you that you're not really looking at reality. That's in the nature of cities. But don't despair. Leaders understand that, and they orchestrate a process of discovery that learns from all the realms. Now, I'm not trying to say everyone will agree and you can have a perfect base precinct and development that everyone signs up to. No, you're going to have to negotiate about it. But I think leaders can help that be a constructive process. It doesn't have to be a kind of a bun fight of conflict. But that's where leadership is so important in all of those realms. I think my last slide is this one, which is, again, it's not new information. It's just sometimes helpful to present it in a different way. So now it's a process model. The environmental limits are there. We heard some discussion this morning about the importance of, I think you could do something spectacular on the environmental front in Base Precinct. I think go to 2050 and think, do even better than Freiburg. You could, it's a space. So this is a constraint, but in another way, it might be a source of inspiration where you can do something different. You've got these 3 variables that I mentioned, the economic forces, the socio-cultural, the governmental, and then there's a system of place-based governance. Agency is exercised by, if we go to Sydney, you could fill out the picture here, the city, the different districts, Leichhardt, I don't know, forgive me, I don't know enough about the boundaries, but there's different local authorities, there's the state, there's other interests. That can lead to new practices and new institutions. I hope that doesn't sound too abstract, and again, I've tried to give you 1 or 2 very specific examples. In my view, place-based leadership can make an enormous difference to the quality of life in a place. Like extraordinary. We don't celebrate it enough. Urban studies scholars like me, we don't write enough about these achievements, and we should do. So maybe just to close, I'm trying to suggest place-based power, despite the placeless forces, is still enormously important, and that's the case here. Secondly, exposing yourself to ideas from other countries or other cities can be quite stimulating and might spark some new thoughts. But most of all, just closing, I'd like to say I think you've got a fantastic opportunity here, and it's wonderful the way this has been organised, this whole conversation. I think Urban Growth New South Wales deserves some real credit for trying to get us doing some thinking. If you remember, David said this morning, we're not trying to plan anything. You said, let's have some thinking and sharing some ideas. And that's what we're trying to do today. Thank you very much.